welcome to Books on Point. In an action-packed account, Johann van Loggerenberg describes how, as a young policeman, he worked closely with the investigative team of the Goldstone Commission to uncover the Third Force, apartheid security forces that supplied weapons to the Inkatha Freedom Party to destabilize the country. He also delves into how and why, at the height of state capture at the South African Revenue Service in 2014, he was falsely accused of being an apartheid spy, a lie that persists up to today. Here he finally tells the truth behind deep cover police agent RS536. Johann, thank you so much for your time.
Hello, ma'am, and to your viewers and watchers, I suppose.
Take me through the rationale or the motivation of putting together the book.
Well, the book was, in a sense, a very short footnote, so to speak, of the very first book that I had published with Adrian Lackey about the events at the Revenue Service in 2014 onwards. And it was just something that that begged, I suppose, explanation and setting out in greater detail, particularly because the false and defamatory claim that I had been an apartheid spy remained so persistent as part of the public attacks against the Revenue Service and some of us who had subsequently left there.
Talk me through, growing up as a child and the bubble that you would have been brought up under, having gone to the school that you went to, grown up in the neighborhood that you grew up in. What kind of childhood would you have had that would have sheltered you, I suppose, for good or for bad, against what was happening in the broader, country and the propaganda that ran with it?
Well, I grew up in a white suburb. I suppose middle class, as if one can use that term, in the 70s and in the 80s. It was predominantly Afrikaans speaking, and the schools that I went to were Afrikaans speaking schools. And the government of the day was the criminal nationalist apartheid regime. And so as a child, the sort of things that we were put through were these sort of felt schools, that it was called, where they take you off into the bushveld as little kids, and they basically put you through a host of propaganda about the so-called swart gevaars and the rooi gevaar, which was with reference to the majority of black South Africans in the country and all the liberation movements, as well as their ties with communist countries. Of course, they also then would throw in a smattering of, the usual sort of religious guilt trip, and that is kind of what you grew up with. In those days, if you were an adult black person and you wanted to move in any of those white suburbs, you'd have to carry some kind of document that would permit you to do so, and you could only do so during the day, if I recall correctly. You could not move around at night. So, black South Africans were treated as subhuman, and you kind of just never. I mean, the thought of me, making friends with a child of another skin pigmentation as mine was just an impossibility. And this would then be carried through to high school too. And, it's, as I describe in the book, it's a complete bubble. The kind of news that you read, if you bothered to read the news, or what you saw on television, was as if South Africa was a country that consisted of white people only, that it was a fully developed state, and it was comparable to somewhere in, I suppose, Europe or North America.
Right.
And the notion of, that the majority of people were being suppressed by the, government state machinery was just, it was just not there. The name Mandela, or the name Biko, or Fisher, or any of it. It was just not names that I had known.
Right. I'm not going to give away too much because I do want the viewers to go and buy the book, and they'll find a very interesting story of how you made the decision between the army and joining the police force. But fast forward, when you look back at your work, I mean, the personality that you would need to have in order for one to be able to operate covertly, what kind of personality was that? And I suppose when you look back at your childhood, how did that contribute in order for you to be able to do the work that you did?
Well, I think in a sense, in the book, I tried to explain some of the key factors. I think it was this awareness of, that I developed partly because of, the trauma of being very young and your parents splitting up. It causes you to suddenly be more aware and of how people behave and how they feel, and your world is kind of split into two in a sense. So I think that did play a part. Of course, another key figure in our upbringing was a lady by the name of Anna Maslahula, who was our second mother. In fact, she was our mother. We saw more of her than our mother. And her life was so completely different. And so I think there were all those dualities in my life as a child that caused me to be more of an observer than a participant, and somebody who started questioning things, not really understanding why, but at least questioning them. And then I think, look, let's face it, we all operate undercover every day, make no mistake. I mean, our personalities at home with our families are very different to our personalities that we present at work, for instance, or when we're with our friends, or when we're in different situations. Many people like a good skinner, if I can use that Afrikaans term for rumor mongering, or listening into some saucy story of what the neighbors are up to, or whatever the case might be. So in that sense, it doesn't really, in my view, require a special skill or a special attribute. It just, it's quite different from being an undercover cop with the intent to focus on organized criminals and ultimately bring them before a court of law with a view to prosecute them or to seize the contraband or whatever the case might be. It's very different from, the classic sort of spies that infiltrated liberation movements or the other way around.
Yeah.
It's actually a different science completely.
Johann, thank you so much for your time, for also taking us through some aspects of the book. That is Johann van Loggerenberg talking to us about his new book titled Cop Undercover, My Life in the Shadows with Drug Lords, Robbers and Smugglers. That's it from me. I'll be back next week with The Alternative Investor. Goodbye.